It's early morning on a hill above Hebron's old city, and a group of Palestinian activists is on the move. Their mission, they say, to escort children safely to school through the city's divided streets. But their approach is barred by Israeli soldiers. The army has declared the area a military exclusion zone, off limits to non-residents. The activists say it's to prevent them recording and drawing attention to instances like this, filmed a few days earlier when they were confronted by Israeli settlers.
Documentation is the most important. Everyday attacks happen here. But how can you show them to the world? If we go in the future to the ICC and statistics that we have for the future, if we're talking about attacking kids in the UN, we have to come up with the statistics.
Until last month, such documentation had been the job of observers from the Temporary International Presence in Hebron, or TIF. Its 25-year presence in the city, reporting on violence and human rights violations, was brought to an end by the Israeli Prime Minister, who accused the monitors of working against Israel. TIF's mission began in the aftermath of the massacre in 1994 of 29 Palestinian worshippers inside the Ibrahimi Mosque. Husni Rajabi was praying that day near the front when an American-Israeli settler opened fire from the back of the room.
I think about it all the time. I was tripping over people lying on the floor, the dead, the wounded, calling for help. It's an unforgettable tragedy.
The gunman, Baruch Goldstein, was a follower of the far-right Jewish rabbi and politician Meir Kahane, whose party was banned as racist in the 1980s. Now, days before the massacre anniversary, the Israeli Prime Minister has pushed for a current-day Kahanist party, which includes members who celebrate Goldstein, to form an alliance with one of his own coalition partners ahead of April's election. A particularly bitter Israeli election campaign, along with the ejection of the monitors, makes for a potentially explosive backdrop to Friday's demonstrations marking the anniversary. They're also to protest against the divided, militarized nature of daily life in the part of Hebron, 20% of its area, that remains under Israeli control. This was the commercial hub of Hebron's old city, but since the division, the Palestinian shops in this market have been shuttered. Only Israeli traffic is allowed to drive down these roads. There is a heavy security presence everywhere. It's yet another illustration of just how otherworldly this city has become over the last 25 years. It's noted by this group of French Muslims on a tour. One tells me the checkpoints look like they're for cattle, not humans.
Ethnic cleansing.
It's present in a Jewish group that came in days earlier under heavy army escort, the guide calling the activists, in their observer vests, terror supporters. 25 years since the mosque massacre, Hebron remains a place of close-quarters friction, a frequent flashpoint of violence.
Well, Bernard Smith is live for us from Damascus Gate in occupied East Jerusalem, and we'll talk to him in a minute. But first, let's go to Harry Fawcett in Hebron. Harry, a very poignant event in Palestinian history. So what does today mean for Palestinians in Hebron living under Israeli occupation?
Well, yes, it means a great deal. This was a hugely important, tragic event in Hebron's history 25 years ago. The actual anniversary will fall on Monday, but this is the closest Friday to that anniversary. And that is why we're seeing this protest, which has been taking place for the last half hour or so, outside this closed-off entrance to part of the old city, which is under Israeli control. What's quite interesting is that last year, a similar protest by Youth Against Settlements, the activist group that we saw in that report, they were prevented from even getting to this area. This time, it seems the Israeli forces have allowed them to come here, have allowed them to pray. Also, just someone trying to walk through. Also, we are expecting another protest to be carried out by people affiliated to the Fatah political faction. So this is the initial protest. Sorry, there's some arguments breaking up behind us between the media and some of the people from this area. Let's keep on. We've also seen the Israeli forces massing behind the gates. We've seen patrols coming out, trying to ensure that the area is, in their terms, secure. There are Israeli soldiers in buildings around us. But so far, they've been looking on. They haven't been intervening in this protest.
Yeah, and Harry, just seeing what happened to you there just a few seconds ago, we can already see that Hebron being a flashpoint. I mean, could there be trouble on the streets later today?
Possibly. I mean, I have to say, so far, most of the trouble, most of the disagreements have been between Palestinians outside the gates here, some of whom don't want the protest. There was one person who didn't want the protest to take place here because he was worried about the potential for violence and for tear gas and the effects of that on his children. Certainly in past years, there have been clashes, and so that is why members of the media such as us are in protective gear. It is why there were preparations being made on both sides, it seems, before these protests began. This is a small protest. It's only about 30 or so people. We wait to see what happens when what we expect to be the larger Fatah-linked protest takes place in a few minutes' time, maybe an hour's time.
All right, Harry Fawcett there in Hebron.